Okay, we are still in the fifth chapter of Hilchos Deos. Um, Toward the end, we're up to the last halacha, which is halacha Yud Gimel in Perek Hey of Hilchos Deos. Sorry about that last night. So the Rambam has been discussing the ways, the appearance, the attitude and dress and basically ethic, the work ethic, every single thing you ever wanted to know about how a Talmud Chacham has to act and appear can be found in this chapter. So we're at the very, very last halacha where he talks about now the way a Talmud Chacham conducts business. That doesn't necessarily sound like a oxymoron because, as I have said about a million times already, the Rambam almost goes out of his way to make this point that it's not about learning, it's about working. That's why he tells you right in the beginning of Yud Gimel, Masa u'matanos al Talmud Chacham ve'emes ve'umuna. Not if a Talmud Chacham does business, but when a Talmud Chacham does business, it has to be with emes and amuna. Okay, good faith. Omer alav lav ve'al hein hein. His no's should be no's with conviction, and his yeses should be yes. We had this Gemara in Hazahav. The Gemara over there quotes Hin Sedek, right? Remember that? It says that your hains should be with tzedek. Your yeses have to be with tzedek. They learned that from the pasuk of Hin Sedek. Okay, and just other FYIs the Rambam throws in. Medakdek al atzmo b'cheshbon, right? He's very, very careful when it comes to his accounting, literally, right? When he's doing his QuickBooks and his taxes and everything, it's got to be with accuracy, okay? And when he sells to other people, he should always go l'chumra, meaning he gives in. The word levater in Hebrew means to give into. So he gives in to others when he buys from them, but when someone owes him, he's like, okay, pay me whenever, right? He always takes the high road. Okay, v'nosen demei hamekach la'alter. Okay, when he buys something, he doesn't put it on a 60-day credit card. He gets the money right away to him. Ve'eno nasa lo arav v'lo kablon, and he does not act as an arev or a kablon. Okay, for other people, he doesn't kind of like interfere with other people's transactions. V'lo yavo b'harsha. Very interesting halacha the Rambam says. He doesn't act as a collector for someone else. Let's say his friend is a malveh that gave money to someone. And his friend says, hey, do me a favor. You're a respected guy. Go bother the lova and, try to collect my money, right? There's a whole industry today called debt collection, right? So this is a take on that, all right? You shouldn't be doing that. Continues the Rambam, Machayev atzmo b'divrei mekach u'memkar b'makom shalacheva alav Torah. And what he does is he accepts the responsibility in mekach u'memkar, even as they say, shalok kedas, meaning even the Torah is not machayev him, he takes upon himself stringencies, even where the Torah does not demand. Right? He always goes above and beyond. So that he should always stick to his word, and never go back on a commitment. Right? If you remember, the Gemara in Hazahav discusses right in the beginning of the fourth perek this concept of misha para, right? Someone who verbally expresses interest, and even if he pays, but there was no mashicha, without getting into the various details. But there's a concept that the Chachamim gave you a curse if you allude, or if you induce someone into buying something and then you change your mind, so that's not a good thing. Technically, you didn't violate anything because there was no kinyan, there was no mos, but you get a good old-fashioned misha para, which is a really, really bad curse. It's called misha para ma'anche dor hamabul v'haflagu hu yipara misha enu omid b'diburo. All right, what the connection? I heard a beautiful vart, not for now. We could talk about it some other time. The Torah Tamima discusses what the connection is between the Dor HaMabul and the Einu Omid B'Diburo. Okay, remind me next year. Great. So, how about the Rambam? He continues. He says, if someone owes him money, right? He's, very lackadaisical about it. He could be mochel them, right? He says, oh, you owe me money. And I mean, I think the Rambam is maybe overdoing it a little bit, meaning it is, it's actually Priyas Balchov as a mitzvah. We had a shir on that one Tuesday night, that actually paying your debts is, I mean, people, always remind you about how great it is to lend money, but when it comes to paying back, it's a different story. But you should, but you should collect your debts. But the Rambam here says you have to be, a little nice about it. Grant extensions and, stuff like that. And be very, very gracious. Now the Rambam, at a left field, brings up a completely new topic. This is what we call antitrust. Right, there's a whole chapter in Bava Basra, the second chapter in Bava Basra, starting on Daf 17, Yud Zayin or so, talks about, it's called Harchakas Nezikin, distancing yourself away from your friend and not to damage. And then it talks about unfair competition, right? Opening up a falafel store right next to your friend's falafel stand, right? That's a no-no. The Gemara over there in the second chapter of Bava Basra goes into details. And the Rambam here just mentions it in 5 words, right? No unfair competition. V'lo yatzer la'adam la'olam b'chayav. Okay, and don't be a tsar to someone. Don't cause someone tsaros. Very general, obviously. Klol shel davar. This is the rule, says the Rambam. You want to know what a Talmud Chacham is or should act in a nutshell? He says, and this comes from a Gemara, La'olam yihiyeh min hanirdafin v'lo min harodfim. Never pursue others. If you had to pick to be either the pursuer or the pursuee, always opt for B. Always opt to be the pursuee. Okay, min hane'alavin v'lo min ha'olvin. That's one of my favorites, right? It says 3 times in Shas. It says someone who's maver al midosav. Right, the Rosh Hashanah Yud Zayin, the Gemara in Yuma says it at the end of the first parak. It says Hane'elavin ve'enam olvin aleim it says aleim akasav omer kitseis hashemesh bigvura so. Right, that was the whole story with the sun and the moon. That is not in Chagiga Daf Beis, but rather Chulun Daf Samech. We discussed this a few months ago, that you always should take the high road. Never, never, never dish it out. You should only take it. Again, major, easier said than done, because we're all humans at the end of the day, but we got to try our hardest. For Adam, and also you don't want to be a doormat, right? You don't want to be known as a doormat in business, because then everyone takes advantage of you. So there's a very, very, it's very, very difficult to be somewhere in the middle. Anyways, va'adam she'osa kol ha'masim ha'elu kiyotze behen alav ha'kasav omer. And if you do all these things, the pasuk says, "Vayomer li abdi ata Yisrael asher b'cha es pa'er." Pasuk in Yeshaya Memtes says that God said to me, "You are my eved, who in you I will be glorified." Okay, that is the 6th parak. We now begin the 7th parak. Excuse me, that's the end of the 5th parak. We're going to start the 6th chapter now. And it's, I guess this is kind of like a potpourri now, just a sprinkling of different, again, things that all sound logical and reasonable, right? You don't need to go these aren't such chidushim, but the Rambam states the obvious, and he begins by saying, Derech briyaso shel adam lihios nimshach b'deyosav ubamasav achareyav. Right? We all know this to be true. We are all, by hook or by crook, influenced by other people, right? In our Deos and in our Maisav, right? You kind of, what's the word, sublimation, right? You kind of like blend in, right, with your surroundings, right? Achareyav, right? It's kind of like, you put the tofu in the cholent. Tofu by itself doesn't have a taste, but when you put it in cholent, it then tastes like cholent. So that's how a lot of people become. They kind of blend in, and they are, they echo basically where their surroundings are. So on that note, he says, "V'chaver v'noa kaminag anshe midaso," and you end up associating with people around you, and you get their midos. Now it's interesting because where does the Rambam get this from? So he gets it from a famous Gemara that you would think has nothing to do with this. It comes from the classic song that we sing at weddings called Ketzad Maraktin Lifnei Hakala. Okay, so if you remember the famous Gemara in Ksuvas Daf Yud Zayin, there's a machlokas between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Right, Beis Hillel say Kalana v'chasuda, and Beis Shammai, right, we only sing half of the song. And I think we had a shir on this 3 summers ago when we were learning Ksuvas. If you remember, the discussion is like, are you allowed to lie? Like, the obvious question is, what if the kala is, whatever, gross looking? So what exactly do you say? Do you say kala nava chasuda? So that's actually a debate between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai. So Beis Shammai says, you got to tell the truth. Beis Hillel says, no, 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 we don't. No, you just say it anyway. Right? So the problem is, if she's, old and whatever and not good looking, so how could you say na v'chasuda? It says midvar sheker tirchak. You can't lie, right? If someone's ugly, they're just ugly, right? So Beis Hillel says, well, here's how I'll answer you. She may be ugly, but to you she's pretty. And the example that Beis Hillel says, if you go and you buy a car, and it turns out to be a horrible car, and you can't return it, so you have to live with it. So do you spend every day cursing and saying, wow, this is a horrible car, and I rue the day I ever bought it? Or do you get to like it and make, as they say, lemonades out of lemons? So that's exactly Beis Hillel's point. So he says, Yishabchene ba'anav. You make it nice to you, right? You make it nice. You take a bad situation, right? An ugly girl that you got stuck with for whatever the reason, and make the best out of it. And from there we learn, and this is the punchline. There the Gemara says we learn. It's called the Olam Tiye Daito Shaladam Me'ureves im Habrios. You should always be mi'ureves, a very difficult word. It literally means mixed in, but the word is more like empathetic. You should always try to find the good, right? And treat everyone nice. So yeah, she may not, be, model material, but make the best of the situation. And that's where this whole discussion about what the Rambam says over here, to be empathetic and to blend in and to be just a good guy, that's where this first line, believe it or not, of the Rambam comes from. Okay. Lefichach, so now that we know that, the Rambam says, now that I told you that you have to blend into society and not to stray too much from the norms, therefore, tzarach adam lehischaber letzadikim v'leyeshev etzel hachachamim tami kidei sheyilmad b'maseihen. My advice to you is, hang out with good people, right? Surround yourself with tzadikim and chachamim, right? Tami kidei sheyilmad, so that you learn from them, right? You may not be the best and the brightest or the most religious, but chances are, through osmosis, right, it will penetrate to you. V'yisfachim min harishoim. Don't hang around bad guys. not in a completely, 100% comparison, but this kind of reminds me of what they always say about like some past presidents that, they weren't the best and the brightest. They said it about Reagan. He wasn't, where he came from. He was an actor and this, and he wasn't the best and the brightest, but he was smart enough to realize to surround himself around, Caspar Weinberger, the Jew, right? Around smart people. The same thing they said about George Bush.
Weinberger was an Episcopalian.
He wasn't Jewish?
Not at all.
Okay, I'm sorry. Still, okay, well, I was going to use, right, George Bush, right, surrounding himself with Condoleezza Rice and other people. So we all know that Bush wasn't, the brightest. Then again, there are presidents, there are bright presidents, like Biden, for example, that he doesn't have to hang around smart people. So anyways, so this is kind of the same thing, is you may not be the best, but, surround yourself around the best. And as the Rambam says, through osmosis, it will eventually seep to you. Okay, but whatever you do, don't hang out around Rishayim. And then he quotes a pasuk in Mishlei, Hu sheshlomo omer holech es chachamim yechkam baroek silim yeroah. Right, you go to the wise and you'll become smart, but if you go to the if you go to the fools, you will certainly suffer. The Omer Ashrei Ha'ish. Now the Rambam goes into like graphic detail and he says, for example, if you're living in a really, really bad place, you're in a very corrupt society. Right, you're in a really bad place, a fakrum place. Move. Don't hang out in that bad place. So says the Rambam, what if you're in a place where everything around you is bad? Now, obviously, they didn't have planes and trains and you couldn't travel that far. But let's say if you're surrounded in a really bad place, like, I don't know, the whole California, for example, right? And that's all you know. So every city is bad. You can't just move to this place. You can't move to that place. Every place, every place is decrepit and horrible. So what do you do? And by the way, you see the Rambam says, Kumoz Manenu. He's giving a little editorial, right? Remember we had this last week, where the Rambam says, don't be a T-page and reverse the order about getting married and supporting yourself. So here the Rambam says, Kamoz Manenu, like in our time, where what? Where all the places are bad. I don't know, was everything bad in the times of the Rambam? Interesting. Let's say if you couldn't go to that city that had good yeshivas and a nice place to live because they were pirates, right? And there were missiles flying back and forth. Or there was holy, or there was a pandemic. Wow, so what's the answer? The answer is Yeshuv Levado Yechidi. Go and hide, right? If you can't run, then hide. Kinyin Shenemar, like it says in Eicha Yeshev Badad V'Yidom, right? Sit by yourself like a boded and be quiet. V'im hayu ra'im v'chatoim she'emenichan soleshet b'medina. I think this is maybe referring to like Sodom. Remember those wild stories? The Gemara at the end of Chelek talks about what they would do in Sodom, right? They'd cut your legs off if you stayed in a place and the bed was too short, and all kinds of crazy nonsense that they did in Sodom. So if they literally make you mix in with them, right? So what do? So literally run away. Run away in the middle of the night, run out to the forest like the Navardics do and hide and meditate and make sure you're not found. Whatever you do not hang around bad dudes. The pasuk in Yirmiyahu says, I wish you could give me a place to sleep in the desert, like a orach, like a guest. So I guess we'll stop tonight.